Just why don't you start by giving us sort of what your remit and responsibility is right now at Starcom, and then we'll take off the conversation.
Great. So I work for Starcom MediaVest Group globally. I lead our digital and data analytics capability, which really has evolved. I've been with the company almost 4 years now. And the way that I would describe the role is not just building the business and the capability for the future. By the way, is this mic working okay? Not too much feedback, guys, right? Okay, cool. But really understanding where the business is going and how we build for that, how we partner for that, how we invest for that, perhaps how we acquire for that. And in truth, that's where I spend a lot of my time. So it's a kind of broad remit, a global remit for the business, for SMG, which incorporates all of SMG's companies, all 8,000 people around the world.
So I think the thematic of today is really, well, it's interesting. I was having a conversation with a buddy who I haven't seen again since CES for a long time at the entrance. We were talking about the world of convergence, right? And it's interesting because I remember using the word convergence when I was like the chick in the booth at CTIA working for a handset manufacturer 10, 12 years ago. And it feels real this time, right? I think it is real, actually. It's quite refreshing. So tell me how that affects your activation and channel planning, just like holistically. Like, where are you now when you look at, and let's stick to video, right, mostly. How does that differ from where you were 24 or even 12 months ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny, words made it when everyone's using it, and I guess convergence is one of those words. What I'll do, and God, I'm gonna be like the lame person who sticks a framework on the wall, but I will be. And the reason is I'll just kind of talk you through how we're thinking about the space, because in truth, it's a really complicated and complex space right now, and everyone's trying to move from linear to digital, and especially in video, everywhere in between. And so what I thought I would share is nothing more than some thinking and a framework around how we're starting to talk to our clients about this understanding kind of the impact of convergence and how you activate in a converged video world to move from kind of analog, if you will, to kind of precision video at scale.
Yeah, and Lisa, when you talk about it, if you can contextualize, because I think, a lot of, and sort of just the world in which I live, like, there is a chasm between performance-driven marketing and activation investment versus brand-driven, right? And that's something about the world of mobile and television coming together, is the measures of success and the KPIs that you're using to actually determine what your ROI is are totally different. So as you go through your framework, if you can maybe sprinkle that in, I think that would be a really good color to add to it.
Yeah, in terms of how we're measuring success across, or starting to.
And how you marry it all, because that seems to be one of the hardest things.
And will continue to be. So, outside of just pure linear, I mean, really, if you kind of think about the continuum, we're talking about, data-driven linear. So just doing television smarter with data. And in truth, a lot of that is like index TV buying. You hear a lot of people talk about programmatic TV. I would actually argue they're doing data-driven television, not really programmatic yet. As you kind of move across that continuum, you start to think about addressable television, really using granular set-top box data. And when you talk about metrics, on the kind of data-driven television side, it's really about, did I target who I want to reach more precisely, right?
Right.
The metrics are still similar to kind of traditional linear TV in the way you buy it and measure it today.
But it's still, although, if we talk about sort of the use of data with television, it's the addressability is more about efficiency and eliminating waste, right? But the reality is it's still a reach game, right? I mean, TV is still about reach at the end of the day.
Well, yeah, reaching the most valuable people for your business to drive the right outcomes, yes. It actually goes back to the chart that Scott showed at the very end. I think, data-driven, what he showed at the very end, that kind of case that I think he landed on, was exactly what I think data-driven television is all about. Really understanding who you're reaching and finding them across. And so that's data-driven, and that's reaching them all the way through, digital video. I think as you move across that continuum in addressable TV, which still is not scaled, but we believe there's a ton of opportunity, you start to get to much more granular data sets, set-top box data, and be able to marry that set-top box data with actual actions that consumers take. So you start to be able to really close the loop in terms of measurement. And did this particular spot that I delivered to this person, understanding who they were, drive a particular action?
And is most of that measurement attribution driven? Like, what are the typical KPIs that brands are using? It's attribution mostly.
Largely attribution driven. In truth, a lot of our clients still leverage, legacy models that they use. So I think what you're starting to see, only to use our favorite word, convergence again, is the convergence of legacy measurement systems with kind of a lot of testing of new forms of determining what drives outcomes. And certainly, attribution is a big piece of that. I would argue that a number of major media companies have made big acquisitions lately in that space for that very reason.
Right.
I think as you move across, you get to more kind of connected television as it comes to video and kind of over-the-top delivery. The ad model there isn't really baked, but I think it's important to note that, as you kind of go across that continuum, connected is an important space from a consumer behavior proposition.
And what do you see the runway for connected? Because connected and over the top is sort of a very broad
IP-enabled,
right?
yeah.
Right, but if we talk about connected, are you, a lot of the consumption of linear content on a connected device is app-driven and it's more of a on-demand model. So are you saying sort of like in a pure play where you see the runway for connected is extended to reach using a pre-roll unit as a premium ad?
I don't know that I would say that. I mean, the interesting thing about any continuum is nothing is mutually exclusive.
Right.
So the truth is that I might argue that addressable would actually be inclusive of video on demand and some of the digital ad insertion technology, et cetera.
Okay.
And that I would, and again, it's really just, again, a way of thinking about it in a framework to think about it. But I would think about connected as much more over-the-top delivery. And, if Reed Hastings...
So like authenticated experiences mostly?
Yeah, perhaps. Or, like if Reed Hastings had his way, we wouldn't all be in business from an advertising perspective and consumers would pay for content. So,
but you would pay for data probably at some point in the future. Okay.
We'll see, yeah. And then I think there's a really rich space, which, Alphonso is playing a big part in, which is around kind of the amplification of the first screen. And interestingly, and this is a nuance, but I think it's an interesting one, which might actually go away as, the business matures a bit, is this idea of both active amplification. So I'm doing something on the first screen to drive a call to action, and then I'm kind of integrating that call to action back into the first screen. So you see a ton of that today with a lot of the overlays on, especially live television, with tweets coming in, polls, things, happening. And that's a much more active kind of amplification of first to kind of the other first screen, mobile, which again, that 93% number actually surprised me a little bit, but makes a ton of sense, I suppose. The other kind of side of amplification of the first screen I would call more passive, and that's more of like the syncing. So the consumer is not necessarily doing anything, but companies like Alphonso are delivering a much more kind of synced experience between the content that a consumer is engaged with on the first screen and what they might be engaging with on a mobile device during that same period.
And right now, sort of where we are kind of in maturation, do you think are we at a place where it's about kind of lift in traditional brand metrics off of the let's say the first screen, let's use the metaphor of the first screen being the device on the wall, the TV, right? So in this construct, is it really now in this sort of nascent stage of the marketplace about amplification of purchase intent, awareness, things like that? Because it's, I mean, for me, the reason I asked the question is because when we sort of were, in the early stages of premium video and we were starting to get that uptick in momentum, we talked a lot about how premium video inventory amplified television, right? And we would, like I think Yumi did a study where there was a 7% lift in brand awareness versus when it was a video campaign on its own versus an 11% awareness lift when it was coupled with a 30-second campaign on linear. So are you seeing that it's more, again, I mean, because I feel like the business metrics are so important for us to be able to get the industry to have a meaningful conversation about it. Where do you think brands are most interested now in getting return?
So I'm going to answer two things, or address two things. I think the first is what you describe, which is really interesting because it's an indication of where we've been and where we are and where we're going, which is the idea of, hey, if you just run television ads on the first screen and you run digital video, you get more, right? 1 + 1 = 3. And what we're talking about now, which is absolutely a result of technology and consumer behavior. We're actually talking about the experience and the content that a consumer is engaging with on the first screen or just viewing on the first screen, and actually having a complementary, engagement on a mobile device, for example. And that's taking it even farther. So I think that's an important kind of note and nuance. In terms of how brands are measuring that, I actually don't want to be prescriptive and say, it's all about a specific performance KPI or it's all brand, and I'm gonna take the total cop out, but I think it's the right answer, which is it genuinely is about what what metric is important to that particular brand. And I think with SMG is a great business in the sense that we have a ton of really strong CPG brand building, historical brand building clients.
Right.
And in those cases, as we're really pushing the model, I'll give a really specific example in kind of the space of what I'm calling active amplification. The idea that you can kind of in-program drive a call to action with a consumer, get a response, and integrate it back into even the commercial time. So think of it as like a linear TV commercial with a social overlay. And there's a lot of companies in the space doing that, and we're partnering certainly with some of them. And in those cases, suddenly you can take a metric, like a brand metric from television, and you can start to overlay actual consumer response and CRM metrics, right? So suddenly you can go kind of flatten that funnel, if you will, from a TV ad to capturing a consumer's data and email, because they've now opted in to engage with your brand.
Right.
So I guess I'm probably unfairly not totally answering your question, because even a lot of our clients who care very much about reach and awareness, to your point, and really important brand metrics, also, Kraft is a great example. They have a ton of recipes.
Yep.
And they, by the way, in the last year, under Bob Rupchinsky, who's an amazing guy and client, have taken a huge leap forward in how they understand what's valuable about their own customers and use that really specifically to segment and target audiences and do this kind of work, and transform that business really from also, it's an and, caring about upper funnel brand metrics, but also taking it all the way down to really understand one-to-one in a CRM sense.
Where there is a response path.
That's exactly right.
Well, it's an interesting, and I don't want to get over cerebral and over intellectualize it, right? But for me, it's sort of interesting because, so it's been the year of mobile for a long time.
Yeah.
We'll just leave it at that. Decade plus has been the year of mobile. And I find that there's some kind of interesting juxtaposition that what really is going to drive premium value in mobile and sort of rise above the noise of the tonnage that exists on mobile is not necessarily the one-to-one nature of it, which we've all been talking about on its own sort of as a channel, but it's rather the amplification of sort of that journey of one-to-many, one-to-some, one-to-one, right? That being from the first screen to the mobile device. And how we think about mobile as a channel, when we think about it vis-a-vis television, is totally different than when we think about it as a direct one-to-one marketing channel. I think it makes it really hard because as an industry, and this is what I would love to sort of hear your thoughts on, because if we look at sort of the concurrent trends and swimming lanes, automation and programmatic is one, right? But all of a sudden, and if you look at the way the programmatic ecosystems have matured, they've really been sort of channel specific. It was display for a specific purpose, then it was video, and now television is being lit up, and they're all sort of separate. And now if we talk about mobile and programmatic, how does that trend of automation feed into how mobile is starting to actually realize its true value for brands? How does that all come together from a workflow perspective?
That was 75 questions
I know, I'm
in
sorry,
one.
but okay, so let me break it down. It just seems like your job is getting harder,
yes.
right? And I'm not on the agency side anymore, but it's damn, your job just, you're getting hammered to do more with less, right?
Yeah.
That's why you're using data and technology to deliver greater ROI.
Yes.
But now when it all comes together, I'm how do you manage all that for a client and set their expectations reasonably?
Look, it's a hard thing to do. I think you raise an interesting point around how the business grew out of digital channels, which aren't even the right words to use, but they're kind of our words, right? Display, video, social, mobile. I think what we're seeing now, though, and I think that this this will kind of catalyze much faster than it took us to get to where we are today, is that you're seeing technologies that are basically moving us beyond cookies into people and identifying people across devices. And once you can really get there, I think that it kind of removes the channel distinction, because it becomes much more about who it is you want to talk to, regardless of where they are and where you can identify them. So for example, I sat on the Facebook panel this morning, the Facebook video panel. And if you think about Facebook and Atlas and the recent announcement around how they've rebuilt Atlas, I think very similar to how SMG thinks about organizing data around people. You know, the Facebook proposition of, you know, finding people across devices and screens is starting to really ring true with marketers. And so what I expect is that the distinction will become less and less, because it will become much more about the consumer, who it is we're trying to reach, with, you know, how valuable they are, and then the outcomes that marketers are trying to drive.
So I mean, as you know, the mapping of the device graph sort of becomes more mission critical, and if we talk about mobile realizing its greatest value, you know, vis-a-vis sort of television, right? Let's say that's our theory, our hypothesis, right? What does the lack of a cookie, or like the emergence of UI, you know, of sort of UID, and like how all that is kind of muddy water right now on mobile, how does that impact? Is it actually holding it back at all? Is it affecting the momentum and the ability to sort of, you know, move quickly and get marketers to really double down?
A couple things. I mean, I think there's a lot of things holding it back in terms of, I think the words user mobile reaching its full potential.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say that, you know, TV plus mobile is the full potential of mobile, of course. In fact, you know, what I think is really interesting in mobile, and one of the biggest...
Do you have an opinion about what it is, though?
That mobile's holding back the tipping point?
Yeah, I mean, just if we take a step back, we just say, like, do you have an idea, like, what's panacea for you when it comes to, like, mobile, as a marketer, serving a marketer? What would you have that we don't have right now at your fingertips?
Well, I mean, what you're describing is how and why are we not closing the gap faster between consumer behavior and where we are as an industry in terms of essentially investment and dollars. I actually think we're getting there fast. I mean, if you look at 1 billion video views a day for Facebook, and 2/3 of those happening on mobile, and then now the opportunity to monetize. And let's think about it, right? None of that is really monetized. Like, they just opened up Facebook video ad product for video weeks ago. So I fundamentally believe, and there's lots of things that have held it back around measurement, currency, you know, all those things, but it's also been kind of ad product and inventory being open. And, you know, let's face it, it took Facebook over a year to feel like they got it right. So if it takes a year just to figure out the ad product model for one of the biggest, most scaled platforms in terms of video views, that's going to hold everyone back, right? So I genuinely think we're in a place where I think about businesses like Keep, if you know those guys, and Brian Wong, and I mean, essentially what they're doing is creating a new monetization unit within mobile, where suddenly you have an opportunity in an app where you get surprised and delighted with a reward. Or, you know, a business like Discuss, which is actually spelled D-I-S-Q-U-S, but it's not discus, Discuss. They actually power 70% of the web, including mobile, comments, like, you know, after any article or blog. And what does that potentially create? It creates net new inventory to monetize on mobile. So I just think that the inventory side hasn't been figured out from a monetization perspective, which of course creates a chasm between how marketers can spend their dollars to close that gap with consumer behavior. And it's just going to take time.
I mean, I think also concurrently, if you just look at, it's interesting, you use the word data-driven TV buying versus programmatic, right? And I think one of the things, I had this conversation as well before with a gentleman out in the front, that like, the other problem is just, in general, we're at such a nascent stage, we can't even have a conversation and use the same words and mean the same thing as an industry, right? And I mean, like, what we see sort of as, right now, one of the buzzwords is native advertising. I mean, how does that manifest on mobile? What is that, right? Because when we talk about it, we typically immediately go to place, we're not talking about brand content anymore or advertorial, it's really like the Outbrains of the world, and that's kind of how we're looking at it. But how that manifests on a platform like mobile or a device is, you know, is kind of enigmatic right now. We haven't figured that out. I mean, how much do you think that, you know, do you think that marketers are really, if we talk about, I mean, because, you know, so it's interesting, right? If you look at sort of legacy and endemic ecosystems like television, it's small companies that disrupt, that typically create peaks and valleys in value, right? And I would say Alphonso is sort of a company like that in mobile, right? They're kind of a disruptive that's going to create some immediate value. Who do you think is actually going to drive the sustainable value creation for mobile as an advertising medium? If we talk about revenue and sort of, you know, is it that trajectory? Is it advertisers and marketers pushing to realize it because they're investing on the platforms? Or is it the innovation's going to come from within? Or is it the big guys like AOL and Facebook recognizing that not only in the US, but like, you know, I was talking to the Twitter team because we were in there with one of my broadcast, you know, clients out of Mexico. 70% of all video views, period, in Mexico right now are on mobile, right? And developing markets have basically skipped the browser.
Yeah.
So what's going to be the force, do you think, that really is the tipping point to make it?
You know, I mean, hell if I know, but what I think is. It's like,
Lisa,
you know,
is hands down the most honest agency person you've ever met in your life.
Because we all know, you know.
And Lockhorn, I'm holding you guys to that when you get up here in a few minutes.
We all know we like, you know, make shit up and we're not right most of the time. But
you have really amazing frameworks.
But like awesome frameworks. No, look, I think it's tied to what I said before, which is I do fundamentally believe it's about, you know, the right inventory to monetize. You know, like look at our partnership with Twitter, which is, believe it or not, 1.5 years old, like in renewal right now, which like, that's like, you know, crazy speed light years that happen. And, you know, if you look at the growth on that platform from ad revenues, you know, and SMG being a major partner and, you know, major client of that platforms. And you add MoPub, right, which wasn't even part of Twitter when we did our agreement, right? Suddenly you're just opening up new inventory sources. Suddenly you can take data and content from Twitter's platform into apps through MoPub and integrate them with products that we're creating, you know, at SMG, like content at scale. And it's really, you know, and turn a tweet into an ad unit. I mean, those are the things that money follows, you know, innovation and kind of engaging ways to reach consumers. Brands want to be relevant to consumers in as kind of real-time way as possible, drive, you know, really great engagement and ultimately good business outcomes for that. I mean, it's that simple. And mobile is the best way you can have a personal kind of conversation with a customer or a consumer, you know, on behalf of our client's brand. So it's not that the money's not there and it won't get there. And obviously with platforms like Twitter, it is. But there have to be more avenues that are meaningful to really spend on. So I believe it is that side of the business. You know, of course, all the other ancillary things have to get done.
Do you think, I mean, you mentioned craft, right? And sort of what, I mean, craft is, you know, Kraft has a couple different sort of parallel marketing and brand initiatives, right? I mean, they're productizing mobile by making it an extension in some regards with their recipe applications. You know, they have they productize mobile in some ways. And then so complementing that with advertising or, you know, extending reach there makes a lot of sense. But brands that don't have a mobile product, a mobile experience, a mobile, you know, point of sale, like if they really don't have a response path or some lower funnel experience, where does mobile play in that, in their sort of, in their activation or their comm strategy?
Well, look, I mean, you asked about the agency business and all the challenges we have, one of which I don't think is disintermediation, although I do believe we have to be smart because disruption comes from everywhere. But that's actually should be our value proposition, right, as an agency, to be able to work with a brand, to help them understand consumers better. Like, that's what we've always done. That's what our sweet spot is. And kind of consult and give them, you know, a point of view on how they need to think about how their brand intersects consumers. And to your point, that is largely, you know, on the device many, many times. So, you know, look, I think that is if I'm being, really honest, it's I don't want to call it a gap, I'll call it an opportunity for businesses like ours to kind of lean in a bit more in terms of the opportunity that our brands have in mobile that, you can't even get down to advertising, right? If you just don't get the consumer relationship right through the device.
So I want to end on, partly because it is an incredibly relevant topic, and I don't think there's an answer to it, so I'm not asking you to solve it, but also because I was just catching up. I was reading the latest issue of HBR on the train, and there's an interview with Fallon there about how he gets brands to take creative risks, right? I mean, what good is it, right? My dad has a very colorful phrase to describe it. If you use data to better reach an audience, and to know with whom you're speaking, and you don't change the message at all.
Right.
I mean, creative optimization and the issue is that's a hard cost to a brand. That is a hard operational cost to for more creative derivatives and variants. Like, how do you manage that expectation, and how hard do you push?
Well, the answer right now is, how do we manage it? Not very well. And I'll give you a real example, like yesterday. I mentioned kind of what we're really pushing in terms of kind of driving social response and embedding that back into the first screen in television. And there's companies out there that facilitate that technically. Never Know is one of them, Mass Relevance, Weigh In, a number of them. And we had this amazing campaign planned to go live in 3 weeks on behalf of one of our clients, a QSR business. And somehow, we were going to have 300 personalized spots over a number of weeks based on social response integrated into the commercial overlays until suddenly a massive TV trafficking charge was brought up that somehow never surfaced before. And the team freaked out and was like, we don't have any budget for that much, and then it's like, wait, how are we TV trafficking? I mean, by the way, do you guys know we still fax stuff? It's true. And then there's companies like MediaOcean that are trying to solve for it, and Extreme Reach and others. But, our people aren't necessarily trained on those systems. And I'm certainly not going to solve for that in 3 weeks, nor do I even want to think about trying. And so we're scrambling to find solutions. So the truth is, we have to deal with some of these legacy, systems and approaches in order to do exactly what you're suggesting. I don't believe there's a silver bullet. I mean, I have a job similar to a lot of people at a lot of agencies where you're taking 8,000 people, and I always like to say, instead of walking in the morning and opening up what used to be Lotus Notes, and finally we have Outlook, yay.
Wait, have you not washed away the bitterness yet?
No.
No. There's a long history with Lotus Notes and any former publicist or present publicist.
That's true. But, you'd pull up your email and your Excel, and that's what you work in. And we're trying to shift to a business that opens up software and works in software, right? Builds audiences and activates against those audiences. And that's a big change for our business. And so whether it's, changing the tide of TV trafficking or getting people to sit down and open up an application instead of Excel, we're on that journey big time. And we're going to try to get there fast. And, I'm sure all of you are on that journey too.
Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.